Ladies and gentlemen, you stand at the edge of history when the mere utterance of power, 130 nuclear missiles, isn't just a number, it's a scream into the abyss. A sign of how far humanity can fall when pride overtakes principle. And here lies the paradox: we build weapons in the name of peace, yet threaten each other to maintain it. Do we not see the absurdity? True power is not the ability to destroy, it is the discipline not to. Every time a nation lifts its hand in warning, it should first ask, who suffers most? It's never the leaders, it's the farmers, the teachers, the children asleep in their homes, the old man in his shop, the girl dreaming of school. They are the ones who bleed when missiles fly, not politicians in polished offices. You see, chaos isn't a distant myth, it's close, closer than we admit. And once unleashed, it doesn't stop at borders. We must rise above reactive thinking. Retaliation feels right in the moment, but it is a primitive impulse, not a strategic solution. A wise nation must have the courage to choose conversation over conflict, even when its arsenal is ready. The strength of a nation isn't in the warheads it stockpiles. It's in the minds it nurtures, the peace it protects, the bridges it builds. So if you want to be strong, be disciplined, be wise. Be just. Do not measure your worth by how much you can destroy, but by how much you can preserve, because real courage isn't pulling the trigger, it's knowing you can and still choosing not to. The shadow of power is responsibility. That simple truth is often forgotten when the language of war starts to dominate national discourse. When a country announces that it possesses 130 nuclear missiles, it is not merely stating a fact, it is unveiling a capacity to reshape the world in fire, ash, and silence. But to wield that level of power is not a mark of superiority. It is a weight that must be carried with extreme care, clarity, and a moral compass sharpened by wisdom. It is easy to confuse strength with the ability to intimidate. It is tempting to think that a loud threat equals control. But real power, mature, grounded, conscious power, does not express itself in explosions or destruction. It expresses itself in restraint, in the quiet refusal to escalate, in the strategic choice to absorb pressure without collapsing into chaos. Any nation can launch a missile. Only a wise nation can lead with stability while holding such capability in reserve. A nuclear weapon is not simply a technological achievement. It is a test of a civilization's maturity. When you can destroy millions in moments, the burden is no longer just strategic. It becomes spiritual. It calls into question what kind of people you are, what kind of future you envision, what legacy you want to leave for those who come after you. Because power untempered by responsibility turns to arrogance, and arrogance left unchecked leads to ruin. History is full of empires and nations that rose through strength but fell through recklessness. They believed their might would protect them from the consequences of their decisions. They thought fear was the ultimate tool of diplomacy. But fear breeds hatred, and hatred always finds a way to return. Nuclear weapons, if used, do not simply defeat an enemy. They annihilate the concept of victory. No one wins in a nuclear exchange. Everyone loses morally, psychologically, generationally. The very possession of such weapons should provoke humility, not hubris. A leader who has control over such tools must understand that they are not just military assets. They are existential questions. Every missile carries with it the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Every warning reminds us that modern war is not just about borders or ideology. It is about whether civilization survives or collapses under the weight of its own inventions. This is why responsibility must rise in exact proportion to capability. The greater the destructive potential, the greater the moral depth required to manage it. It is not enough to have scientists and engineers. You must also have philosophers, ethicists, spiritual leaders, and educators shaping your national consciousness. A country cannot be held together by missiles alone. It must be held together by vision, by unity, by a sense of shared purpose that transcends immediate retaliation. And that begins with asking the harder questions. Not can we launch, but should we? Not what will they fear, but what will our children remember? When a leader threatens nuclear war, he may imagine himself commanding the battlefield. But in truth, he is gambling with the invisible future of generations who did not vote for destruction, who did not choose hatred, who only wanted a chance to live, to love, to learn, and to grow. This is not idealism. It is realism at its highest form. Because reality, when stripped of all illusions, tells us one thing very clearly: war ends lives, but it never ends conflict. Conflict must be resolved through insight, through negotiation, through a mutual understanding of shared humanity. That requires strength, but not the kind measured in kilotons. The kind measured in character. So if a nation declares its nuclear might to the world, let it not do so with pride, but with solemnity. Let it speak not as a conqueror, but as a guardian. Because those who carry the power to destroy the world are duty-bound to protect it. Anything less is not just irresponsible, it is a betrayal of everything that civilization has ever achieved. And that, more than any bomb, is what will ultimately define us. War is not born in the battlefield. It is conceived in silence, the silence that follows the collapse of dialogue, the breakdown of empathy, and the failure of meaningful conversation. When nations reach the point of threatening nuclear retaliation, they are no longer operating within the domain of reason, but reacting to a world they believe cannot be changed through speech. Yet history reminds us that every war is proof of a conversation that was either ignored, misunderstood, or never attempted in good faith. Language is the foundation of civilization. It is how we structure order out of chaos. It is how we align competing interests and navigate conflicting perspectives. When language fails, when dialogue becomes a weapon or an afterthought, violence takes its place. And while violence might feel immediate and decisive, it never resolves the underlying issue. It only suppresses it temporarily under fear, destruction, and trauma. The embers remain smoldering in the minds of the survivors, passed on to future generations. In that light, nuclear threats are not just geopolitical signals. They are admissions of failure. When a leader stands behind a podium and declares with pride or desperation that their country has 130 nuclear weapons ready to fire, they are essentially announcing to the world that reason has been abandoned, that the most advanced species on the planet, capable of poetry, science, and philosophy, cannot resolve disputes without threatening extinction. This is not a show of strength. It is a warning about how far we've drifted from our higher potential. The real tragedy is that behind every war there were moments, quiet, subtle, often ignored, when peace could have prevailed. Before the bombs fall, there are always ignored proposals, misread intentions, unspoken fears, and ego-driven ultimatums. The machinery of war begins turning long before the first shot is fired, and it is usually oiled by pride, suspicion, and the inability to listen. Dialogue, when taken seriously, is a preventative force, a kind of intellectual diplomacy that can dissolve hostility before it calcifies into hatred. But to engage in real dialogue requires something most leaders fear: vulnerability, to admit one's grievances without posturing, to listen without already preparing a rebuttal, to ask, "What do you need?" rather than demand, "Here's what we want." These are not weaknesses. These are the strengths of those who understand that nations are not abstract entities. They are collections of people, families, children, communities whose lives are shaped by every decision made in a negotiation room or ignored on a global stage. When we stop talking, we begin to dehumanize. And when the other becomes less than human, destruction becomes thinkable, even desirable. But imagine just for a moment what could happen if that same intensity we use to prepare for war were applied to building peace. If the energy spent on missile systems was invested in understanding history, culture, and the psychological roots of conflict. Peace is not passive, it is constructed brick by brick through hard conversations that demand patience, humility, and wisdom. We often say that peace talks have failed, but what does that really mean? Did they fail because the issues were unsolvable, or because the participants weren't willing to step outside their narratives? Because they were more focused on appearing strong than being truthful, more concerned with saving face than saving lives? This is the critical difference. War is the shortcut taken when people no longer believe dialogue is possible. But it is always possible if we are brave enough to face the discomfort of compromise and the complexity of truth. So when a state issues a nuclear threat, it should not be met with awe. It should be met with mourning, for the conversations not had, for the voices not heard, for the wisdom that was cast aside in favor of destruction. It should renew our commitment not to retaliation, but to creating institutions, cultures, and leaders that prioritize words over weapons, meaning over noise, dialogue over dominance. Because in the end, civilization is not measured by how many weapons we can unleash, but by how many conflicts we can diffuse without them. To talk is human, to understand is divine. And when we choose the divine path of understanding, we protect not only ourselves, but the fragile hope of every generation yet to come. Nations, like individuals, possess identities. They carry memories, wounds, pride, and a longing for significance. And just like individuals, nations can be overwhelmed by their ego, by the desperate need to assert themselves, to never appear weak, to dominate rather than negotiate. But this collective ego is fragile. It is rooted not in true strength, but in fear of irrelevance, fear of being outdone, fear of losing face. And when ego begins to shape national policy, the result is almost always tragic. A perceived insult, a disputed territory, a painful history never addressed or healed. Instead of approaching these with humility, openness, and the willingness to hear the other side, leaders often revert to grandiosity. We are strong, we cannot be challenged. We will show them. It sounds like courage, but it's a mask for insecurity. When a nation feels it must constantly prove its worth through military shows or threats of destruction, it reveals not confidence, but a lack of internal coherence. Just like a person who brags loudly in every room they enter, the identity of a nation must be more than its ability to inflict harm. It must be defined by its values, its contributions to humanity, its capacity for compassion and growth. A great civilization isn't remembered by how many enemies it destroyed, but by how many lives it uplifted. And yet we often see national pride reduced to power displays, parades of missiles, and angry speeches. These become tools not of inspiration, but of intimidation fueled by unresolved national trauma. The true test of maturity, whether for an individual or a state, is the ability to respond to offense or challenge with measured thought rather than emotional eruption. Consider this: if someone insults you and your first instinct is to strike back, are you in control, or are you being controlled by your pride? Now scale that up to the level of governments. When one country challenges another, and the response is not dialogue, not strategic clarity, but the announcement of nuclear capability, that is not leadership. That is the national ego lashing out. National identity must be rooted in something deeper than rivalry. It must be connected to service, to meaning, to the long arc of history that asks not just what we defended, but what we created. To be proud of one's nation is noble, but pride that is insecure becomes a breeding ground for aggression. And aggression, when tied to identity, blinds us. It makes compromise feel like defeat. It makes diplomacy feel like weakness. And so we plunge forward, thinking we are protecting honor, when in reality we are letting our egos burn down the very legacy we claim to defend. It is no coincidence that countries in long-standing conflict often teach their children more about their enemies than about their shared humanity. That is a failure of education and identity. When a child is raised to believe that their worth is tied to the defeat of another nation, the seeds of war are planted in their soul before they even understand peace. The ego of a nation becomes their personal burden, and the weight of old grievances shapes their view of the world. This is why leadership matters. Not just political leadership, but cultural, educational, and moral leadership. Leaders must speak not only to strength, but to wisdom, not only to past injustice, but to future possibilities. They must remind their people that identity built on hatred will always collapse. That true pride comes not from proving someone else wrong, but from building something so right that the world can't help but admire it. Nations, like people, must learn to forgive, not because the past doesn't matter, but because the future does. An ego, while it can rally people in the short term, always leads to isolation in the long run. When a country bases its actions on pride rather than purpose, it begins to rot from within. It becomes reactionary, bitter, and eventually self-destructive. So the challenge is this: can we shape our national identities not around who we oppose, but around who we aspire to become? Can we elevate pride into purpose and ego into empathy? If we can, then perhaps the next generation will speak not of war, but of wisdom, and not of what we threatened to destroy, but of what we had the courage to build. Chaos is always closer than you think. It doesn't knock politely. It doesn't announce itself with a warning. It lurks beneath the surface of every civilized society, waiting for a crack in the foundation, a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment. And when it comes, it doesn't arrive gradually. It crashes in, overwhelming every system we believed was secure. We imagine civilization as permanent, stable, indestructible. But history shows that peace is fragile, order is rare, and chaos, if invited even slightly, takes everything we've built and reduces it to rubble. We live in a world of rules, agreements, treaties, norms, and assumptions. But these are thin layers, delicate webs that hold back the primitive instincts of destruction and domination. When a nation threatens nuclear war, it is not merely flexing muscle, it is pulling at the threads of this web, risking the unraveling of everything that civilization stands for. One miscalculation, one ego-driven decision, one spark in the wrong place, and all the assumptions that kept us safe can disappear in seconds. The modern world gives us an illusion of control. We have governments, militaries, communication systems, emergency protocols, but these mechanisms are only as stable as the people who operate them. And people, no matter how experienced or educated, are vulnerable to emotion, fear, anger, pride. When those emotions guide decisions of war, especially decisions involving nuclear weapons, the descent into chaos can be terrifyingly swift. You don't have to imagine what that chaos looks like. You only need to study history, not ancient history, but recent history. Places where cities were reduced to dust, where families vanished in the blink of an eye, where systems collapsed overnight. And in each case, it began with the illusion that war could be controlled, that violence could be limited, that the machine of destruction would somehow stop at the right moment. It never does. Once chaos is released, it grows beyond the hands of those who unleashed it. We underestimate the interconnectedness of our world. A single act of destruction in one region can destabilize entire continents. The economy trembles, alliances shift, borders tighten, and ordinary people suffer. And the most dangerous thing is that chaos doesn't need the consent of the many, only the recklessness of the few. A few leaders, a few voices, a few misjudged responses can bring the world to its knees. That's how close chaos really is, a breath away, a sentence away, a button away. But it's also true that just as chaos can be released quickly, it can also be held back by discipline, wisdom, and a deep understanding of what is at stake. This is why restraint is not weakness. It is strength of the highest order. Anyone can shout, anyone can threaten. But only the truly courageous can say no to the temptation of war when every part of them is screaming for revenge. Only the wise can hold the line against the pull of destruction. In times of tension, leaders must remember this. They are not merely defending territory. They are standing guard at the edge of chaos. Their words are not just policy. They are signals to the world about whether we will step forward into progress or fall backward into ruin. And the people, the citizens who live under these decisions, must also recognize their role. Chaos grows when apathy spreads, when people stop paying attention, when they forget that the civilization they enjoy was built over centuries and can be undone in days. We must be vigilant, not paranoid, not fearful, but aware that every decision matters. Every word spoken on the world stage carries weight. Every escalation, every provocation, every reckless threat chips away at the wall that separates us from the abyss. Peace must be maintained, not assumed. It must be built and rebuilt every day through diplomacy, through education, through mutual understanding. To forget how close chaos is to become vulnerable to it. To believe we are too advanced, too smart, too strong to fall into destruction is the height of arrogance. The truth is we stand on the edge always. And it is not fear that should keep us from falling. It is responsibility. The responsibility to choose stability, to protect order, and to remember that everything we love can be lost if we forget how easy it is to lose it. The essence of leadership is not found in the ability to command obedience or to project power. It lies in the capacity to bear responsibility, especially when the stakes are existential. When a leader threatens to unleash 130 nuclear missiles, it is not merely a statement of military capability. It is a profound abdication of the responsibility to safeguard life and ensure the continuity of civilization. Such declarations, rather than showcasing strength, often reveal a deeper insecurity, a fear that without the shadow of destruction, one's voice may not be heard. True leadership demands the courage to confront challenges with wisdom and restraint. It requires an understanding that the wielding of immense power comes with the obligation to prevent its use. The real measure of a leader is not in their capacity to wage war, but in their ability to prevent it. This involves engaging in dialogue, seeking common ground, and prioritizing the well-being of all people over nationalistic fervor or personal pride. In the context of escalating tensions between India and Pakistan, the responsibility of leadership becomes even more critical. The history of conflict, particularly over the disputed region of Kashmir, has led to deep-seated mistrust and repeated cycles of violence. However, perpetuating this cycle through threats of nuclear retaliation only serves to deepen the divide and increase the risk of catastrophic miscalculation. Leadership in such times calls for a reevaluation of priorities. It necessitates a shift from a focus on retribution to a commitment to reconciliation. This means acknowledging past grievances, addressing legitimate security concerns, and fostering an environment where diplomatic solutions are not only possible but are actively pursued. It also involves educating the populace about the devastating consequences of nuclear conflict, thereby building public support for peaceful resolutions. Moreover, responsible leadership must recognize the interconnectedness of today's world. A nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan would not be confined to their borders. It would have global ramifications affecting economies, displacing populations, and causing environmental disasters. Therefore, leaders must act not only in the interest of their nations, but also with a sense of global stewardship. The path to such leadership is undoubtedly challenging. It requires resisting the allure of populist rhetoric and the temptation to respond to provocation with aggression. It demands patience, empathy, and a long-term vision for peace and prosperity. But it is precisely in these difficult moments that the true character of leadership is revealed. In conclusion, the responsibility of leadership in the nuclear age is immense. It is a responsibility that must be met with humility, foresight, and an unwavering commitment to the preservation of life. By embracing these principles, leaders can steer their nations away from the brink of destruction and towards a future defined by cooperation, understanding, and lasting peace. In the realm of international relations, the concept of deterrence is often misunderstood. Many perceive it as a mere display of military might, a show of force intended to intimidate adversaries. However, true deterrence is not about boasting capabilities. It's about the silent assurance that a nation possesses the means to defend itself, coupled with the wisdom to avoid unnecessary conflict. It's a delicate balance between strength and restraint, where the ultimate goal is not to wage war but to prevent it. The recent escalation of tensions between India and Pakistan serves as a poignant example of how this balance can be disrupted. In the wake of the Pahalgam attack, where 26 civilians lost their lives, emotions have run high on both sides. India's decision to suspend the Indus Waters Treaty and take other punitive measures has been met with strong reactions from Pakistan. Among these, the statement by Pakistan's Minister Hanif Abbasi asserting that 130 nuclear missiles are aimed at India stands out as particularly alarming. The Guardian 10, the New Indian Express, Plot 10 in India, 10 Wikipedia for 7 India Today, Plot 7, the Guardian Place 7 latest news and breaking headlines, 11 the Times of India, 11 YouTube, 11 such declarations, while perhaps intended to deter aggression, can have the opposite effect. They can escalate tensions, provoke fear, and increase the risk of miscalculation. Deterrence, when wielded recklessly, becomes a double-edged sword. It can deter adversaries, but it can also corner them, leaving them with limited options and increasing the likelihood of conflict. Moreover, the psychological impact of such threats cannot be overstated. When leaders speak of nuclear capabilities in a cavalier manner, they desensitize the public to the horrors of nuclear war. They make the unthinkable seem thinkable, the unacceptable seem acceptable. This erosion of moral and psychological barriers is dangerous as it lowers the threshold for the use of such weapons. It's essential to remember that nuclear weapons are not just tools of war, they are symbols of humanity's capacity for self-destruction. Their existence is a constant reminder of the need for caution, diplomacy, and mutual respect among nations. When leaders threaten their use, they not only risk immediate conflict, but also undermine the long-term stability of the international order. The doctrine of deterrence must be grounded in credibility and responsibility. A credible deterrent is one that is believed to exist and to be used only in the gravest of circumstances. It's not about making threats, it's about ensuring that potential adversaries understand the consequences of aggression. Responsibility, on the other hand, entails the prudent management of these capabilities, ensuring that they are not used as tools of coercion or intimidation. In the current climate, both India and Pakistan must exercise restraint and engage in dialogue. They must recognize that their actions have implications not just for their own populations but for regional and global stability. The international community, too, has a role to play in facilitating communication, reducing tensions, and promoting peaceful resolutions. Ultimately, the goal should be to move beyond deterrence as the primary means of ensuring security. True security comes from building trust, fostering economic and cultural ties, and addressing underlying grievances. It comes from recognizing shared interests and common humanity. While deterrence may prevent war in the short term, only cooperation and understanding can ensure lasting peace. In conclusion, the recent developments between India and Pakistan underscore the importance of responsible leadership and the careful management of military capabilities. Deterrence, when used wisely, can be a tool for peace, but when wielded recklessly, it becomes a catalyst for conflict. It's incumbent upon all nations to remember the true purpose of deterrence, not to threaten, but to prevent, not to provoke, but to protect. In the intricate tapestry of international relations, the doctrine of deterrence serves as both a shield and a sword. It is a strategy rooted in the paradox of peace through the threat of unparalleled destruction. For nations like India and Pakistan, both armed with nuclear capabilities, deterrence is not merely a military concept but a psychological one, influencing decisions at the highest levels of governance. India's adherence to a no-first-use policy underscores a commitment to restraint, signaling that nuclear weapons are a last resort intended solely for retaliation. This stance is designed to project stability and predictability, reducing the chances of miscalculation. Conversely, Pakistan's doctrine is more ambiguous, allowing for the first use of nuclear weapons under certain conditions, particularly if it perceives a threat to its sovereignty or territorial integrity. This flexibility is intended to deter conventional military superiority by introducing uncertainty into the strategic calculus of potential adversaries. Arms Control Center PLA1 AP News PLA1 The psychological dimensions of these doctrines cannot be overstated. Deterrence relies heavily on perception, the belief that a nation is both capable and willing to follow through on its threats. This belief must be cultivated not only among adversaries but also within the nation's own populace, fostering a sense of security and national pride. However, this delicate balance can be disrupted by rhetoric that escalates tensions or undermines credibility. Recent events have tested this balance. The tragic attack in Indian-administered Kashmir, resulting in the loss of innocent lives, has reignited hostilities and led to a series of retaliatory measures. India's suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty and expulsion of Pakistani diplomats are indicative of a hardening stance. Pakistan's response, including public statements about its nuclear capabilities, aims to reinforce its deterrent posture but risks escalating the situation further. The Guardian, the psychological impact of such developments is profound. Citizens on both sides are subjected to a barrage of information that can foster fear, anger, and a desire for retribution. In this environment, leaders must navigate the treacherous waters of public opinion, strategic necessity, and moral responsibility. The temptation to appear strong and unyielding can overshadow the imperative to seek peaceful resolutions. Moreover, the international community watches closely, interpreting each move through the lens of global security. Allies and adversaries alike assess the credibility of deterrence strategies, the stability of leadership, and the potential for conflict spillover. In this interconnected world, regional tensions have global ramifications, affecting economic markets, diplomatic relations, and collective security arrangements. Therefore, it is incumbent upon leaders to exercise strategic patience and psychological resilience. They must communicate clearly, avoid inflammatory rhetoric, and engage in back-channel diplomacy to de-escalate tensions. Confidence-building measures such as military-to-military dialogues and transparency in defense postures can help rebuild trust and reduce the risk of misinterpretation. Education also plays a vital role in shaping public perception. By fostering a deeper understanding of the complexities of deterrence and the catastrophic consequences of nuclear conflict, societies can cultivate a culture that values peace over aggression. This cultural shift can empower citizens to hold their leaders accountable and advocate for policies that prioritize stability and cooperation. In conclusion, the psychological underpinnings of deterrence are as critical as the physical capabilities that support it. Maintaining a credible deterrent requires not only military readiness, but also strategic communication, emotional intelligence, and a steadfast commitment to peace. As India and Pakistan navigate this perilous juncture, their choices will reverberate far beyond their borders, shaping the future of regional and global security. In the intricate tapestry of South Asian geopolitics, the India-Pakistan dynamic stands as a testament to the delicate balance between historical grievances and the pursuit of peace. The recent escalation, marked by the tragic attack in Kashmir and subsequent military posturing, underscores the fragility of this balance. India's decisive actions, including the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty and expulsion of diplomats, reflect a nation grappling with the imperative to safeguard its sovereignty and citizens. Conversely, Pakistan's rhetoric, emphasizing its nuclear capabilities, reveals a strategy aimed at deterring aggression through the projection of formidable strength. Yet, beneath these overt maneuvers lies a deeper, more nuanced psychological interplay. Deterrence at its core is not merely about the possession of weapons, but about the perception of resolve and the credibility of response. India's no first use policy embodies a commitment to restraint, signaling a preference for measured responses over precipitous actions. Pakistan's more ambiguous stance introduces a layer of unpredictability, potentially heightening tensions but also serving as a counterbalance to conventional disparities. The psychological ramifications of these doctrines extend beyond strategic calculations. For the populace, the specter of nuclear conflict evokes a profound sense of vulnerability. The constant oscillation between peace and hostility fosters a climate of anxiety, where the line between normalcy and catastrophe appears perilously thin. This collective unease is further exacerbated by media narratives that often amplify fears, sometimes at the expense of nuanced understanding. In such an environment, the role of leadership transcends traditional paradigms. It demands not only strategic acumen, but also emotional intelligence and moral fortitude. Leaders must navigate the treacherous waters of public sentiment, ensuring that decisions are informed by rational deliberation rather than reactionary impulses. They bear the responsibility of fostering a discourse that prioritizes dialogue over diatribe, understanding over antagonism. Moreover, the international community's engagement is pivotal. Global powers and regional stakeholders must act as facilitators of peace, encouraging confidence-building measures and providing platforms for constructive engagement. Their involvement can serve as a stabilizing force, mitigating the risks of miscalculation and fostering an environment conducive to reconciliation. Education emerges as a powerful tool in this context. By promoting curricula that emphasize critical thinking, empathy, and historical context, societies can cultivate a citizenry that is resilient against divisive narratives. Such an informed populace is better equipped to discern the complexities of geopolitical issues, reducing susceptibility to propaganda and fostering a culture of peace. Ultimately, the path to lasting peace between India and Pakistan lies in the recognition of shared humanity and mutual aspirations. While historical wounds cannot be erased, they can be acknowledged and addressed through sincere efforts at reconciliation. By embracing a future-oriented perspective, both nations can transcend the cycles of conflict that have marred their past. In conclusion, the current tensions underscore the imperative for a paradigm shift in India-Pakistan relations. Moving beyond deterrence to a framework rooted in mutual respect, open dialogue, and collaborative problem-solving offers the most viable path forward. Such a transformation requires courage, vision, and an unwavering commitment to the ideals of peace and prosperity for all.